All right, the Jiu Jitsu journey has begun. You are on your way to stripes on that new white belt. And I want to give you 10 tips that I think will help you not only in white belt, but for the rest of your journey. Tip number one, eat your humble pie. Jiu Jitsu is the ultimate humble pie in your life, always and forever. I'm a brown belt, and this week is a good example. Black belt comes to town, starts showing some amazing techniques, and I'm like, I know nothing, right? Go to open mat today, getting just worked and demolished and putting in all kind of bad spots. I'm like, man, here we go. This is my humble pie day. So it is always that way. And I will tell you, early on in the journey, there's so much failure, over and over and over again. It's going to happen. Just embrace that. It is part of the journey. My point to sharing what's going on with me, it never stops. That's always and forever. And yes, the longer you stick with it, you'll start having more success. But early on, there's going to be a lot of failure. Just embrace it. It's part of the journey. And then the cool thing is, it's actually how you get good. You fail over and over and over again, and then you start failing a little less, and pretty soon you kind of get good at it. So that's part of it. And so be encouraged. Just eat the humble pie. Tip number two, trust the process. There is a process involved in jiu-jitsu, and I want you to trust that. So many want to seek success so quickly. Within the first month, 2 months, even 6 months down the road, they're like, why am I not progressing? It's like, listen, it takes time. That's the reality of it. There is a process involved, and it's not a quick one. It is a slow train. It's a slow and steady train. So I want to encourage you just to trust that process. Know that in time, stick with it, you will get better. Usain Bolt has a great quote about this. He says, I trained for 4 years for 9 seconds. He ran the 100-meter dash, probably the fastest guy ever. I don't know if that record's still standing. You guys can check me on that. But it stood, I know, for a long time. Amazing. He said, I trained for 4 years for 9 seconds, and people give up after not seeing results for 2 months. That's a pretty convicting quote if you think about it, because a lot of people in jiu-jitsu do that. They train for a few months, they don't see results, so they're like, this is dumb, I'm quitting. It's like, hey, you could have stuck with it, and then you would have started to see some results, but it takes time. There is a process. You can trust it. Tip number three, enjoy the process. That's right. Enjoy the process, because sometimes it will feel like a grind. That's how this works. I get it. You got to know that being a white belt actually should be a whole lot of fun. I think I'm a brown belt now. The second half of my white belt journey and right now are my favorite ever. I absolutely loved being a white belt. I think you should love being a white belt. It's amazing. And all the times when you're just amazed at the things coach is showing, you just are absolutely, you're hooked on it, right? You're watching videos, you're looking up moves, you're thinking about what coach taught at class. I mean, the whole thing just got you going, and it's meant to be enjoyed. So be sure that you don't let that discouragement and all those things, I know it's not coming together maybe as quick as you would want, but enjoy it. Being a white belt is amazing. Tip number four, don't chase the belts. Chase jiu-jitsu and let the belts chase you. I heard this from one of my coaches very early on in my journey, and I'm so grateful because it's really helped me as I've progressed through the belts. I know early on at white belt, you will spend some time at some point. You're probably going to just be like, I really want this blue belt. And if you're not careful, you can find yourself just kind of in a mindset where your only goal is to obtain a blue belt. But here's what you have to remember. Jiu-jitsu is an incredible and wonderful art. It's martial arts, right? And it's the journey of jiu-jitsu itself is fascinating and amazing and beautiful and difficult and all of those things. So embrace that. Like, don't miss out, because I think that's what will happen. If you find yourself in a season where you're chasing the belts, you're going to miss out on the beautiful art of jiu-jitsu and just the journey itself. And so don't do that, right? I like that challenge. I wanted to pass it on to you guys. Chase jiu-jitsu itself. Like, let that be what you're going after. And then, you know what the good news is? When you're ready to be a blue belt, that blue belt will come find you. I promise you, it will come find you when it's time. So just enjoy the journey. Tip number 5, keep going to class. As my good friend Joshua McMillan said when I asked him, he's one of our black belts, consistency is king, right? Like that's so true. Keep going to class. I'll never forget, I'd been training about 3 months in my journey. And long story short, I stumbled into Fabio Santos on the beach out in San Diego, California. And I asked him like, hey, what's your advice for white belts? I just started Jiu Jitsu. And he says, keep going to class. I mean, here's one of the original, he's an OG. He's like, he could have said any advice and he could have given anything. And he said, keep going to class. And I'm so thankful for that advice. And I think that's something that I definitely want to pass on to you guys. You know, keep going, because as we've already mentioned, you might get this, you will get discouraged at some point early on, right? And at some point throughout your journey. But keep going and keep going and keep going. And eventually, even if it doesn't happen, at some point after you keep going, it's going to click. And you're going to be so happy. And you're going to start to see those results. But it does require keep going to class. Tip number 6. This comes compliments of my good friend and black belt, Randy Melton. He's a beast mode in our gym. And he said, and I love this, tap early and tap often. Just do it. So many people, again, we talked about tip 1 was what? Eat your humble pie. Well, sometimes if you allow pride to get in the way, you're going to get put in a really bad spot. And maybe I don't want to tap because whatever the reason. Okay. But regardless of what it is, it's pride ultimately. So you know what? The goal is to keep training. The goal is to not have to spend time like off the mat, right? You want to keep training. So, and accidents can happen, but a lot of times they can be avoided if tap early and tap often. By the way, I still practice this, but you never stop that, right? You understand that it's better to keep training. So just know you need to tap early and tap often. Don't feel bad about it. Embrace it and gladly do it. Tip number 7, breathe. I know this sounds so simple, but I promise you, especially early on, you're going to find yourself just holding your breath during a roll because you've never been put in that kind of uncomfort before, discomfort. You are being pressed and you're going to panic in some way, shape, or form, and you're going to hold your breath. Don't do it. That's a bad habit that actually can carry through blue, purple, brown if you're not careful. So create a good habit right now. Relax, breathe. Next time you go to roll, I would even tell you, like, let that be what you think about. Focus on, okay, breathe this round. No matter if you're in a dominant position or you're being put in a dominant position, like relax, breathe. Just breathe. Focus on that. Of course, you'll breathe ultimately, but there's a way you can breathe in which it will help you to have a whole lot better endurance. Like you'll be able to roll a whole lot longer once you are able to breathe effectively and efficiently. I promise you, you're rolling. You might have gotten super tired in 10 minutes, and then next thing you know, you're breathing. And hey, you know what? You're going 30, 40 minutes and you're good. So that's a good tip. Keep it in mind. Tip number 8, be careful how you define success. Listen, as competitive jiu-jitsu skyrockets, and I'm excited about that, we have to be careful because one thing that can happen in a negative sense is you can start to define success only as in a, quote, win and loss. If I tapped, oh, I lost. And if I submitted them, then I won. Well, okay, fine. In competitive world, yes. But as far as your jiu-jitsu journey, you have to be careful because early on, as we've already mentioned, you're going to have a whole lot of failure, okay? But you have to realize you can have small victories in the midst of a roll regardless of what happens in submissions. So let me challenge you. Think about your rolls, and I want you to think of ways in which you had small victories. We just talked about breathing. Maybe you focused on breathing for a round and you noticed by the end, you're like, hey, I focused on breathing and I feel pretty good right now. That's awesome. Good for you. Maybe you got submitted, but you progressed in the sense of earlier, like last week, this same person caught you and you never saw it coming. But this time they got you, but you saw it coming. You were a little late with that defense, but you know what? You caught it coming. You saw you're progressing. So next time, a little quicker to defend and you got it. So find the small victories and learn to celebrate your successes in the small ways. Tip number 9, think positive thoughts. I say that because, as we've already talked about, be careful how you define success. That if you're not watching it, we've all been there, and I'm laughing because we do this, and you have to kind of catch it and turn it into positive. But you'll start thinking, I'm horrible at jujitsu. Man, I know nothing. Like, this is horrible. And you're gonna have all these things, and so you got to kind of correct that and spin it in a positive way. Like, okay, wasn't the best day for me, but hey, I went to class. Like, I'm going to keep going because that was one of the tips. I'm going to keep going. At some point, this thing's going to turn around. I'm going to trust that. I'm going to trust the process. You have to spin it and understand that you're not defined by, and even your journey of jiu-jitsu is not defined by what happens in a given role for 5 minutes. Like, that's a little silly to allow that to spin your mind. So, but we see that, and in talking with people, I've certainly seen that some people struggle with that. So I want to encourage you, don't let what happens and what materializes in a given role or roles define your journey, right? It's part of it. And as we've already admitted, everyone's going to have success and failure. The failure never leaves. So, you got to understand that. And so think positive thoughts. Like, remind yourself of the little things that you're doing well. Remind yourselves of the journey as a whole you're on, and know that there's days you're the hammer and days you're the nail. So that's part of it. So keep positive, stay positive in your thinking. Tip number 10, just because you submit a higher belt does not mean you are deserving of that rank. And this happens, and I thought this was worth mentioning because you do see that, especially as you get into the latter part of your white belt, or even early on, right? It's like, oh, I tapped a blue belt, I should be a blue belt, or I tapped a purple belt, I should be a purple belt. Well, no, not exactly. Like, right? Like, it doesn't mean that, right? But again, we're going to trust the process. There is a process involved. Now, I will say this in all fairness: if you catch a high rank, good for you. And if they're a good etiquette jiu-jitsu player, what they're going to do is say, hey, great job, great submission, slap, bump. Do high ranks sometimes put themselves in bad positions to maybe, yeah, let you work your stuff? Sure. But if you make the most of that and you actually catch a submission, hey, if you finish a submission on somebody and they get up after the roll and like, oh, I was letting you, do that, and I let you. No, that's not. No, you earned that submission. Okay, a tap's a tap, as our coach says, and that's legit. So nothing can be taken away. You can celebrate that. Hey, you finished that technique, regardless of if they were willingly put themselves in a bad spot. You finished the technique, so celebrate that, right? But understand, like, remember, going back to the process here, we're going to trust that, hey, I'm going to enjoy white belt. So you're going to catch some high ranks sometimes. As a brown belt, I get caught sometimes, and that's just how it is. And you got to, hey, I tell them, great job. If a white belt catches me, it's like, hey, great job, man. That was awesome. And slap bump, we go again. So just know that it's great. Celebrate what you did. I mean, not in a boastful way, but just internally be like, man, I'm glad I was able to finish that. Completely appropriate. Good job. You did great. But there's a process. And remember, we're chasing the art. So when that blue belt's ready to come find you, it'll come find you. Don't try to equate that with when you tap people. All right. That's the 10 tips I have for you. Thankful for the friends at my gym that helped me kind of think of this list. And I want to encourage you to comment what tips would you give? What things do you think are helpful for a white belt to know? Comment below. Would love to hear from you. Keep training on, guys. God bless.